Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a moment that is honestly one of the most deeply emotional and historically rich climaxes in all of ancient literature. We're talking about the dramatic reunion of Joseph and his brothers in Egypt. Now, if you've ever dealt with deep family fractures, betrayal, or maybe just wondered how seemingly random, painful events actually fit into a larger picture, the source material we're analyzing today offers an absolute masterclass. We're going to look at how a story of complete and total rupture miraculously transforms into a blueprint for redemption. So we're starting right in the middle of the action. Picture the scene, right? The tension in the room is so thick you could literally cut it with a knife. Joseph, who is now the second most powerful man in the entire Egyptian empire, has just cleared the room of his royal attendants. Our source text notes that his emotional dam finally breaks. He weeps so loudly that the Egyptians outside the room, and apparently even Pharaoh's household, can hear him. And then he drops the ultimate bombshell. He declares, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt." I mean, what an unparalleled emotional hook. In one sentence, he completely shatters decades of deception. To fully wrap our heads around the magnitude of this narrative, here is our roadmap for the explainer. 1. The climax of reconciliation. 2. God's hidden providence. 3. Royal wagons and provision. 4. The refuge of Goshen. And finally, 5. Spiritual authority in Egypt. Notice how we'll be zooming way out, going from an incredibly intimate reunion to the grand scale of historical reality.
All right, Section 1. The climax of reconciliation, overcoming the past. The source material provides this totally fascinating psychological study of the moment. Just think about the two sides in that room. On one side, you have the brothers, and they are in a state of paralyzing terror. They're completely speechless. In their minds, the very man they sold into slavery now holds absolute, unchecked power over their lives, and they're terrified of swift, brutal retribution. But on the other side, Joseph completely flips the script. Instead of anger, there's weeping. Instead of execution, there's an invitation to literally step closer to him. He responds with entirely unexpected grace.
So, the crucial point is how the source deeply defines what is actually happening here, because this isn't just sweeping a dark history under the rug. True reconciliation is defined as a very active process. It means overcoming that extremely natural urge to condemn the people who hurt you, embracing mutual weakness, and actively choosing to walk forward in peace. Joseph doesn't pretend the betrayal didn't happen. He names it directly, but he absolutely refuses to let it dictate their future.
And that brings us to a highly practical application. As Joseph sends his shell-shocked brothers back to Canaan to fetch their father, he gives them one very specific instruction: do not quarrel on the journey. He knows human nature. He knows that the exact second they leave his presence, the temptation is going to be to point fingers, shift blame, and argue about whose fault it was that they sold him in the first place. This command is his way of enforcing the reconciliation. He's warning them, hey, do not fall back into the toxic patterns of our past.
Moving on to Section 2, God's hidden providence, a new perspective on pain.
You have to ask yourself, how does a human being just let go of decades of trauma and false imprisonment? Well, it requires a massive shift in perspective. Joseph completely reframes his past trauma through 3 key pillars. First, he recognizes he was sent to Egypt to preserve life during a catastrophic famine. Second, his specific purpose was to save a remnant of his covenant family. And third, and this is absolutely crucial, he explicitly states that it was God's design, not human malice, that orchestrated his arrival in Egypt. He's essentially telling his brothers, look, you intended it for evil, but God intended it for good. That theological reframing is literally the only thing that makes his radical forgiveness possible.
Plus, there is an intense, immediate urgency to this divine plan, and that urgency is represented by the number 5. Joseph reveals that there are still 5 grueling years of famine left. The 2 years they've just survived, that was only the beginning. This harsh agricultural reality makes immediate relocation to Egypt not just a good idea, but an absolute necessity for survival.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, Royal Wagons and Provision, Historical Proof.
Now, what's really interesting about this part of the story is how the source material anchors these deep theological concepts in hard, fascinating historical evidence. For Canaanite nomads like Jacob and his family, who typically relied on donkeys and camels to get around, wheeled Egyptian wagons were shocking. This was highly advanced technology to them. Because these wagons were strictly regulated by the Egyptian administration and the military, sending them was undeniable, tangible proof of Joseph's extraordinary status. It showed he had Pharaoh's total, unwavering backing.
Let's walk through how this builds a profound psychological transformation for Jacob, the grieving father. Step 1. When the brothers return and tell him Joseph is alive, Jacob is in complete disbelief. His heart is just numb. But step 2, he sees the physical, undeniably Egyptian wagon sitting right there in his camp. Words weren't enough, but this visual proof changes everything. Step 3. The text says Jacob's dead spirit, which had been crushed by decades of grief, is instantly revived. And that leads to step 4, his resolute, unwavering declaration, "I will go and see him before I die."
That brings us to Section 4, the refuge of Goshen, strategic isolation.
Relocating a massive, multi-generational family of shepherds into the heart of the Egyptian empire required immense strategy. Think about the region of Goshen in the Nile Delta. Joseph didn't just pick any random spot. He secured this specific, incredibly fertile real estate, but it wasn't chosen solely because it was prime grazing land for their flocks. It was intentionally chosen as a sanctuary. It served a much, much deeper purpose for the covenant family.
The ultimate goal here was to preserve the Israelite identity. The primary threat to that goal was Egyptian idolatry and cultural assimilation. If they had lived directly in the bustling Egyptian urban centers, they would have lost their distinct faith in a single generation. So what was the strategy? Isolation in the land of Goshen. This geographical separation acted as a divine safeguard. It provided a physical buffer which allowed the family to maintain their unique culture and confidently hold on to their identity as believers, all while living in a completely foreign, pagan land.
And finally, Section 5, spiritual authority in Egypt, the final blessing.
This is the ultimate culmination of Jacob's weary journey, and it results in one of the most striking encounters in the entire narrative. Just set this incredible visual contrast in your mind. On one side you have Pharaoh, the absolute monarch of the greatest superpower of the ancient age, literally the living embodiment of worldly authority. On the other side you have Jacob, representing spiritual authority. He's a weathered, weary, nomadic shepherd arriving as an economic refugee. From a worldly perspective, the power dynamic is completely, utterly lopsided.
And this brilliantly illustrates the central theological paradox of this entire encounter. The text notes that Jacob stands before Pharaoh, and Jacob blesses him. Well, the spiritual rule is that the lesser is always blessed by the greater. So despite Pharaoh's gold, his chariots, and his massive armies, the text boldly asserts that Jacob, because he carries the covenant of God, actually holds the true superior authority. It proves that lasting significance and real power come from being a child of God, not from earthly status or wealth.
We've covered a tremendous amount of ground in this explainer today, traveling from the intimate tears of a broken family to the grand geopolitical survival of an entire nation. But it all hinges on one massive paradigm shift. So I want to leave you with this lingering question to think about. How does viewing your own life through the lens of God's providence change your approach to past hurts? If, like Joseph, we can actually see a larger design at work, how might that empower us to forgive, to let go of bitterness, and to walk forward into a future defined by grace rather than grievance? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep seeking those deeper connections.